The photograph was never supposed to be found. It had been hidden for years. But last night, it suddenly appeared. Your soulmate's mother recognized you instantly. And within seconds, she was crying uncontrollably. Listen carefully, because what happened inside that house after she found your forgotten picture was far more emotional than anyone expected. She had only been searching through an old wooden box that had remained untouched for years, buried beneath family albums, forgotten letters, and memories nobody talked about anymore. She wasn't searching for anything connected to you. In fact, your name hadn't been spoken inside that room for a very long time. But as she lifted an old stack of papers, something slipped from between them and fell face up onto the floor. She looked down, and froze. It was you. An old photograph of you from a time when your soulmate still believed the two of you would somehow find your way toward the future you had once imagined together. For several seconds, their mother simply stood there staring at your face. Then she slowly bent down, picked up the photograph, and pressed her fingers against its faded edges. Her eyes immediately filled with tears because this picture carried a memory she had spent years trying to bury. She remembered exactly when that photograph had been taken. She remembered how differently your soulmate used to speak whenever your name came up. There had been a softness in their voice, a kind of happiness their mother hadn't seen in a very long time. Back then, she had watched her child imagine a future with you. She had heard plans that were never completed, promises that were never fulfilled, and conversations about a life that disappeared before either of you truly understood why. But looking at your photograph now brought back something even more painful. She remembered the final days before everything changed between you and your soulmate. She remembered the tension inside the family, the private conversations behind closed doors, and one particular moment when someone had said something about you that influenced everything that followed. At the time, she believed remaining silent was the safest choice. Years later, holding your photograph in her trembling hands, she suddenly wondered whether that silence had helped destroy something that should never have been destroyed. Don't skip this, because she then noticed something she had completely forgotten. There was handwriting on the back of the photograph. She turned it over slowly, wiped the tears from her eyes, and read the faded words. Her expression changed immediately. She read them once. Then again. And suddenly she covered her mouth with one hand because those few words reminded her of a promise connected to you, a promise made before your love story fell apart. She sat down on the edge of the bed and whispered, "We got this wrong." Nobody else was in the room to hear her, but she knew exactly what those words meant. For years, your soulmate had lived with one version of what happened between you. They believed you had stopped caring. They believed your silence meant you had chosen to leave. They believed that if you had truly wanted them, you would have fought harder to stay. But their mother remembered something your soulmate didn't know. There had been a reason you stepped back, and someone inside that family had known much more about it than they ever admitted. She could have returned the photograph to the box. She could have closed the lid and allowed another year to pass in silence. But something inside her refused. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the look in your eyes in that forgotten picture. Or maybe she finally understood how much her child had carried because nobody had been brave enough to tell the whole truth. She stood up, held the photograph against her chest, and walked directly toward your soulmate's room. When she entered, your soulmate immediately noticed her swollen eyes. "Mom, what happened?" they asked. She tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, she walked closer and placed the photograph in their hands. Your soulmate looked down, and everything changed. Their face became completely still. Their fingers tightened around the photograph as memories they had tried to control for years suddenly returned all at once. They remembered your voice. They remembered the last meaningful conversation between you. They remembered the questions that were never answered. And most painfully, they remembered how many times they had secretly wondered whether losing you had been a terrible misunderstanding. "Where did you get this?" they asked. Their mother told them about the old box, but your soulmate immediately noticed something was wrong. Finding an old picture alone could not explain those tears. So they looked directly at their mother and asked the question she had been avoiding for years: "What aren't you telling me?" The room went silent. Their mother sat beside them, reached for the photograph, and turned it over. Your soulmate read the words on the back, but they didn't understand why those words had affected her so deeply. "Tell me," they whispered. This time, their mother couldn't escape the truth. She admitted that shortly before the two of you were separated, she had witnessed something. She had heard a conversation that involved your name. And what she heard that day was completely different from the story your soulmate was eventually told. Your soulmate's eyes widened. "You knew something all this time?" Their mother began crying again. She admitted she had convinced herself that speaking would only create more pain. But every year that passed made her realize the opposite might have been true. Then your soulmate asked one question that completely broke her. "Did you ever actually want to leave me?" Their mother lowered her head. She couldn't answer immediately. Your soulmate stood up, suddenly overwhelmed, still holding your photograph. Every memory was now being questioned. Every assumption. Every painful night. Every moment they had blamed you for disappearing from their future. Their mother finally looked up and said, "There is something you deserve to know about what happened to you too. And I should have told you years ago." Your soulmate stared at her without blinking. But their mother wasn't finished. Because she had remembered one more detail. One person had come to her shortly before everything between you and your soulmate collapsed. That person had asked her to keep something secret. At the time, she agreed because she believed she was protecting the family. But now she realized that secret may have been the exact reason your soulmate lost you. Then she reached for an old drawer. Your soulmate watched her pull it open. Inside was something she had kept hidden for years. Something directly connected to you. She placed it on the table beside your forgotten photograph and whispered, "Before you decide what you believe about you and them, you need to see this." Your soulmate reached toward it. But the moment they realized whose name was written on it, their hands suddenly stopped. For several seconds, your soulmate could not touch what their mother had placed beside the photograph. Their eyes remained fixed on the name written across it, because that name belonged to someone they had trusted during the exact period when everything between you and them began falling apart. Suddenly, the room felt different. The forgotten photograph was no longer simply bringing back memories. It was opening a door to a part of the past that had been deliberately kept closed. Your soulmate slowly looked at their mother and asked, "Why did you keep this?" She wiped her tears, but her hands were still trembling. She admitted that she had wanted to throw it away many times. She had even taken it out of the drawer more than once, intending to destroy it and finally remove the reminder of what happened. But every time, something stopped her. Deep inside, she knew there might come a day when her child would deserve to see it. She just never imagined that day would begin with an old photograph of you falling out of a forgotten box. Your soulmate finally picked it up. It was an old folded note, worn around the edges from years of being hidden. They opened it carefully, expecting to find some ordinary explanation from the past. But after reading the first few lines, their expression completely changed. The note described a private conversation that had happened shortly before your separation. Your name appeared more than once. So did your soulmates. But what disturbed them most was one sentence suggesting that someone had intentionally allowed both of you to believe different versions of the same situation. Your soulmate read that sentence again, slower this time. Then they looked at their mother and asked, "Are you telling me someone wanted us to misunderstand each other?" Their mother couldn't give a simple answer. She explained that at the time, everything had happened so quickly that nobody stopped to question the information they were receiving. You were told things about your soulmate. Your soulmate was told things about you. Both of you reacted to information that appeared believable because it came from people close enough to be trusted. And while the two of you were hurting separately, nobody encouraged you to sit in the same room and compare what you had actually been told. That realization hit your soulmate harder than their mother expected. They stood up and began walking slowly across the room, holding the note in one hand and your photograph in the other. Memories that once seemed clear were suddenly becoming confusing. They remembered waiting for you to call after one particular argument. What they never knew was that you may have been waiting too. They remembered being told that you wanted distance. They remembered hearing that you had already accepted the end of the relationship. And because they were hurt, they never questioned where those claims had actually originated. Now they turned toward their mother and asked, "Did they tell you something different?" She nodded through tears. That single movement was enough to make your soulmate sit down again. Their mother began describing the day she first realized something wasn't right. She had accidentally overheard a conversation in another room. Your name was mentioned, followed by words that made her uncomfortable even then. Someone was discussing how difficult it would be for your relationship to continue if certain information never reached you. At first, she thought she had misunderstood. She didn't want to believe anyone close to the family would interfere so deeply in something so personal. But later that same week, your soulmate came home devastated after receiving information about you that sounded strangely similar to what she had overheard. That was the moment she began connecting the pieces. Still, she said nothing. She was afraid that questioning everything would create a bigger conflict inside the family. So she convinced herself that perhaps the relationship had already become too complicated to save. Don't skip this, because your soulmate then noticed something inside the folded note their mother had apparently never seen. Near the bottom was a date. Your soulmate stared at it for several seconds before suddenly reaching for their phone. Their mother asked what they were doing, but they didn't answer. They were searching through old memories, trying to connect that date with something they remembered about you. Then their face changed again. "That was the day before I received the message," they whispered. Their mother looked confused. Your soulmate explained that years ago, they had received a message that convinced them you had made your final decision. It was short, cold, and completely unlike the way you normally spoke to them. At the time, they assumed you were simply finished. They never questioned it because everything around them seemed to support the same conclusion. But now the timing felt impossible to ignore. The note had been written one day earlier. Your soulmate asked their mother whether she remembered that message. She did. In fact, she remembered exactly how devastated they had been after reading it. She remembered watching them sit alone that night, refusing dinner and barely speaking. What she had never told them was that she had questioned the message herself because only days earlier she had heard something completely different about your intentions. She had heard that you were still hoping for one final conversation. But that conversation never happened. Your soulmate suddenly looked up. What final conversation? Their mother froze. She realized she had revealed something she had never planned to mention. Your soulmate moved closer. "Mom, what final conversation?" This time there was nowhere for her to hide. She admitted that someone had contacted her shortly before everything ended and said you wanted one opportunity to explain yourself directly. You apparently didn't want another person carrying messages between the two of you. You wanted to speak face to face because you believed too many people had become involved. Their mother had been told that the meeting would happen. But later, she was informed that you had changed your mind. She accepted that explanation without ever confirming it with you. Your soulmate's eyes filled with disbelief. "I was never told about any meeting," they said. Their mother started crying harder because those words confirmed the fear she had carried quietly for years. If your soulmate never knew about the meeting, and if you had genuinely requested it, then someone had stood between the two of you at the most important moment of your relationship. Your soulmate looked down at your photograph again, but this time there was no anger in their expression. There was pain. Not the old pain of believing you had abandoned them, but a completely different kind of pain, the possibility that both of you had spent years grieving a separation neither of you had truly chosen. They turned the photograph over once more and read the faded handwriting. Suddenly, the meaning seemed different. The words weren't a goodbye. They sounded like hope. Like someone who still believed there would be another chance to explain everything. Your soulmate pressed the photograph against their chest and closed their eyes. Their mother reached for their hand, but they quietly asked another question. "Why are you telling me this now?" She looked at the old picture and answered, "Because when I saw you again tonight, I remembered what happened the last time I saw this photograph." Your soulmate opened their eyes immediately. "The last time?" Their mother nodded. That photograph had not always been inside the old box. Years ago, on the same night everything changed, someone had been holding it. Someone your soulmate knew very well. And according to their mother, that person had asked a strange question about you before taking the photograph away. Your soulmate's voice became almost a whisper. "Who had it?" Their mother hesitated. She looked toward the door as though even after all these years she was afraid someone might hear what she was about to say. Then she finally revealed the identity. Your soulmate went completely silent. Because it was the last person they would ever have suspected. But there was something even more disturbing. Their mother remembered exactly what that person had said while holding your picture. They had looked directly at her and asked, "If they find out what really happened, do you think they'll still stay apart?" And now, after all these years, your soulmate finally understood why their mother had broken down the moment she found that forgotten photograph. But before they could ask another question, their mother whispered, "There's one more thing I never told you." She stood up, walked back toward the old cabinet, and pulled out a second photograph. Your soulmate stared at it in disbelief. Because you were not alone in this one. Your soulmate stared at the second photograph without saying a word. At first, they couldn't understand why their mother had kept it separate from everything else. But when they looked closer, they noticed something that made their heart race. The photograph had been taken during the same period when your relationship was beginning to fall apart, yet the person standing beside you was someone your soulmate had been told you barely knew. Someone who had later played an important role in convincing them that you had already moved on. Suddenly, every old explanation began to feel incomplete. Your soulmate looked at their mother and asked, "Why were they with you?" Their mother shook her head and said the picture wasn't proof of betrayal. In fact, it might prove exactly the opposite. She remembered hearing that you had met this person because you were desperately trying to understand why your soulmate had suddenly become distant. You had been asking questions. You had been searching for answers. You had been trying to reach the person you loved while believing that your soulmate was the one shutting the door. Your soulmate's breathing became heavier. For years, they had carried the opposite memory. They believed they were the one trying to reach you. They remembered sending messages and waiting for answers that never came. They remembered asking people close to you whether you still cared, only to be told that you wanted to be left alone. Now their mother was telling them that you had apparently been doing the same thing from the other side. Two people waiting. Two people hurting. Two people being told that the other had already given up. Your soulmate slowly placed both photographs beside each other on the table. The first showed the person they had loved. The second showed that same person searching for answers they never knew you had been searching for. And suddenly, the years of silence between you no longer looked accidental. Their mother sat beside them and finally admitted the part that had haunted her the most. Shortly after the second photograph was taken, she received a phone call. The caller told her not to encourage your relationship anymore. They insisted that continuing to bring you and your soulmate together would only create problems for everyone involved. She had asked why, but the answer was vague. She was told there were circumstances she didn't understand and that eventually both of you would be better off apart. At the time, she believed the person speaking to her because they had always appeared trustworthy. But looking back now, she realized something disturbing. Almost every important piece of information about you had passed through the same small circle of people before reaching your soulmate. Your soulmate immediately asked for names. Their mother hesitated, but this time they refused to accept silence. "I've already lost years because nobody wanted to tell me everything," they said. "Please don't protect anyone anymore." Those words broke something inside her. She reached across the table, took your soulmate's hand, and promised she would tell them everything she remembered. She began with the phone call. Then the private conversation. Then the meeting you had apparently requested but your soulmate never knew about. Piece by piece, she described the events surrounding your separation. And with every detail, one truth became harder to ignore. The two of you had rarely received information directly from each other during those final days. Someone was always standing in the middle. Your soulmate suddenly remembered one night they had almost called you. They had your number open on their phone. Their finger was hovering over the call button. But someone sitting beside them said, "Don't embarrass yourself. You already made the choice." Those words stopped the call. Your soulmate had never forgotten that moment. Until now, they had believed the advice protected them from another rejection. But what if that call had been exactly what someone didn't want them to make? What if hearing your voice directly would have exposed everything? They stood up abruptly and walked toward the window, overwhelmed by the possibility. Their mother watched silently as years of regret began appearing across their face. Then your soulmate said something she wasn't prepared to hear. "I never stopped wondering about you." Their mother lowered her eyes. Your soulmate admitted that even after life moved forward, there were nights when your name returned without warning. Certain songs. Certain places. Certain dates. Small things would bring back memories they thought they had buried. But whenever they considered searching for answers, they remembered the story they had been told, that you had chosen another path and wanted nothing more to do with them. So they stayed away because they believed respecting your decision was the right thing to do. Their mother began crying again because she now understood the true cost of her silence. Her child had not stayed away because love disappeared. They stayed away because they believed you had asked them to. Don't skip this, because the second photograph contained another detail nobody had noticed. Your soulmate picked it up again and saw a small reflection in the background. It looked like part of a window, and within that reflection was the outline of another person. Their mother leaned closer. Neither could clearly see the face, but she immediately recognized the location. The photograph had been taken outside a small place where an important family conversation happened days before your separation. Suddenly, she remembered why that location mattered. Someone had asked you to come there. You had apparently believed your soulmate would also be present. But according to everything your soulmate remembered, they had never been invited. That revelation changed the entire story. Your soulmate turned toward their mother and asked, "Are you saying you went there expecting me?" She nodded slowly. She couldn't prove every detail, but she remembered enough to know that you had not simply appeared there by accident. You had been told that a conversation would happen. You arrived. Your soulmate didn't. And afterward, both of you were apparently given completely different explanations for why the other person had failed to show up. Your soulmate was told you had refused to meet. You were told something else. Whatever happened that day may have been the final push that convinced both of you to stop trying. Your soulmate sat down again, completely stunned. The anger they once carried toward you was disappearing and being replaced by something much heavier: regret. "All I had to do was call," they whispered. Their mother immediately told them not to reduce years of manipulation and misunderstanding to one missed phone call. Neither of you had understood what was happening. Both of you were emotionally exhausted, surrounded by conflicting information, and afraid of being rejected again. But your soulmate couldn't stop thinking about how different life might have been if either of you had broken through the noise and spoken directly. Then their mother remembered one final detail about that day. After you left the meeting place, someone came to the family home carrying something. It wasn't another photograph. It was a small sealed envelope. Their mother had been told it contained something you wanted returned. She never opened it because it wasn't addressed to her. She gave it to the person who promised to deliver it to your soulmate. Your soulmate immediately turned around. "I never received an envelope." Their mother's face lost all color. She asked them to think carefully. Your soulmate shook their head. "Nothing. No envelope. No letter. Nothing from you." For the first time that night, their mother looked genuinely frightened by what her own memories were revealing. She stood up and began searching through the cabinet again, moving old papers and boxes aside with shaking hands. Your soulmate asked what she was looking for, but she didn't answer. She seemed to have remembered something suddenly, something she had seen years ago but never connected to you. Then she stopped. At the very back of the cabinet was a thin wooden compartment. She pulled it open. Inside was an old sealed envelope. Dust covered the edges. Your soulmate stepped closer. Their mother lifted it carefully and turned it around. And there it was. Your soulmate's name, written across the front. Below it was a date from the exact week the two of you separated. Their mother began crying again. Because the envelope that someone claimed had been delivered all those years ago had apparently never left the house. Your soulmate reached for it with trembling hands. They stared at the seal. Still unbroken. Whatever you had wanted them to know had been sitting there unread for years. Your soulmate slowly began opening it. But when they pulled out the first page and read the opening words, tears immediately filled their eyes. Because the message did not sound like someone saying goodbye. It sounded like someone still fighting for one final chance. And buried deeper inside that envelope was one detail that could finally reveal who had made sure that chance never reached your soulmate.